Greetings, AP Biology students, and welcome to the thrilling conclusion of our ecology unit. I've opened this presentation with one of my favorite headlines from the Onion newspaper, and this particular little article, which actually it's not a tip for success, is it? But is very appropriate for this unit because this unit is all about human impacts on the biosphere. So we're going to apply everything we've learned about ecology to understanding the role that humans have had in changing the environment on the planet. So I actually want to start by reviewing something we discussed in ecology or in our evolution unit. I don't remember if we mentioned specifically that there have been 5 mass extinctions in Earth's history, or if we just kind of talked in general about the idea of mass extinctions. But there have been 5, and a mass extinction is an extinction where large percentages of species have gone extinct. The Permian extinction is the largest that has ever occurred, and the KT, that is actually the one that took out the dinosaurs. So you're familiar with that one for sure, I'm guessing. These others less so, but there have been 5. What a lot of people don't realize, though, is we are actually in the middle of a 6th mass extinction right now, and that this 6th mass extinction is caused almost entirely by human activity. We are losing species at a rate that is unprecedented in the history of Earth outside of those 5 kind of other mass extinctions. So you can kind of read through these little factoids on your own, but there's this graph that kind of shows this background level of extinction, and you can see, here's one graph that kind of estimates how many extinction events have occurred, and here's the background level of extinction, and you can see there's these big spikes that have taken place. Coinciding with kind of the rise of technology in and industrialization of humans. Graph A is a very conservative estimate of how much extinction has happened. Graph B is just a conservative estimate, but you kind of get the point that there have been big spikes in the number of extinction events, since humans took off with our technology. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at what are these threats to biodiversity. And there's actually a lovely acronym that is good for this. Just think HIPPO. And luckily, hippos are not extinct, at least not yet. So you know what those are. But HIPPO can help you remember these. The 5 major threats to biodiversity are habitat loss, invasive species, population growth, and that's human population growth, pollution, and overharvesting. And so we're going to go through these, but not quite in the order of the acronym. So just be prepared for that for you type A's who like your notes to be just perfect. So HIPPO. The first threat I want to talk about is population growth. And the reason why I want to do this one first is because we've already kind of done it. We looked at human population growth and we saw that humans are growing at a rather staggering rate. We've had exponential growth for an incredibly long time. It's only now starting to level out a little bit. And with that comes demands on the environment. And we talked about this a little bit. Do all humans have the same impact? And I hope you learned before that the answer is no, they don't. Humans in developing nations have a much greater impact than humans in, in developed nations have a much greater impact than humans in developing nations. The United States being one of the nations with one of the largest impacts. One way to think about this in your own personal life is to think about what's called your carbon footprint. We're going to talk about carbon when we look at climate change later on in this screencast. But think of this as kind of the amount of carbon dioxide that is released as a result of your own activities. And it's just kind of something to think about because, as Americans, we all have a very large carbon footprint, and anything we can do to shrink that down is helpful. This is a great video. I'd encourage you to click that and link it. And it basically looks at the carbon footprint of one sandwich. So if you eat a sandwich, what impact does that sandwich have on the environment? And it's pretty cool the level of analysis that they go into to kind of explore that question. A second threat to biodiversity is another one that we've already discussed, invasive species. These basically are more common now because humans, seeing we have boats and planes and vehicles zipping across oceans and across continents at a pretty rapid clip these days. We're able, unfortunately, to move species around at a very rapid rate. And then this new species disrupts ecosystems and habitats when it finds itself in a new environment that lacks natural predators or pathogens or parasites. And so we looked at examples of this. The silver carp, hopefully you watched that little video clip of these little carp jumping out of the water. The cane toad, these giant toads that were introduced to Australia. I think we referenced a podcast on the goats of Galapagos, which is very interesting. So Eurasian milfoil in Minnesota, kudzu in Georgia. These are species that have gotten out of their natural ecosystem and are able to spread because those natural checks are no longer in place. Another threat to biodiversity is overharvesting. We haven't talked about this one, but you're probably, it's not that complex concept. It's the idea of simply taking more organisms than the natural population growth is able to replace. So, you think if you pull fish out of the ocean, that's okay so long as fish are able to reproduce at a rate that offsets that. More fish are born and then you take out some. More fish are born, you take out some. And there's a balance there that can be found. Well, unfortunately, we are over harvesting. We're taking out more that can replenish themselves. It's estimated that as many as 85% of world fisheries may be overfished. So we're taking too many fish out of the ocean and numbers are declining because of it. Large African mammals, poaching is a major problem there for elephant tusks and rhinoceros horns and things like that. Oftentimes they're killed for those parts. And the United States, we kind of decimated our ecosystem as we headed west. There used to be, bison that roamed the plains right here in Minnesota. We'd have bison everywhere. And they were hunted to near extinction quite intentionally. People would literally be loaded up onto trains and they'd travel through the countryside and they would just shoot bison from the train, in an effort to exterminate the bison and actually to as kind of a way to harm Native American populations as well, which is another sad tale. The next threat to biodiversity is habitat destruction, simply destroying natural habitats. This happens all the time and we don't really think about it, but just building stuff, you're destroying habitats. So oftentimes wetlands are filled in to make a parking lot or build a building or a development of some sort. And, you kind of look at this and a lot of people think, oh, that's kind of swampy and kind of a gross area. Let's put something pretty on it. Well, this swampy, gross area is a place where water drains to. And when it rains, then that water can go into that wetland and kind of be controlled there. And when we fill those in, bad things happen because there's nowhere for that water to go. And so here you see a woman kayaking to her local Target. But this is happening in you see stories of this after big rains where areas get flooded, and a large part one is the excessive precipitation due to climate change, but another aspect of this that causes this is that we don't have the wetlands anymore to absorb that water, and so it just runs wherever it can go, and it floods areas that we don't want it to flood. Another example is grasslands. Grasslands are oftentimes converted to farmland. Grasslands have very nutrient-rich soil, which is great for growing crops, and you don't have to deal with chopping trees down or anything like that. So, here's a little graph or a little map that shows where grasslands were naturally before European settlers arrived. And now here you can see where grassland is, native grassland, I should say, is still around today. And you can see it's a very diminished habitat. And I think that's important to think about when we talk about deforestation of the rainforest and things like that. We're sort of quick to judge other parts of the world for destroying their habitats when we already destroyed ours and reap the benefits economically from that. And then, by the way, as the grasslands were destroyed, that also harmed those bison, by the way. So, this graph kind of shows that big extinction from 1830 to 1889. Bison plummeted to near extinction, and then have been slowly creeping back up as we've made preserves and parks and things like that to keep them alive. So anyway, another example of this, slash and burn agriculture. So in the rainforest, this is a common practice. You slash the rainforest down and you burn it, and the idea is burning returns the nutrients to the soil. The problem with slash and burn agriculture, or agriculture in the rainforest in general, is the soils are incredibly nutrient poor. And the reason for this, you can imagine the rainforest has like just bajillions of trees and plants. Just imagine that soil. There's roots everywhere. So if there is a nutrient to be found in that soil, you can believe that there's some plant with a root soaking that nutrient up very quickly. So there's not many nutrients in the soil themselves, in the soil itself. And so when you chop all those trees down, um, you're not left with much nutrients in the soil. So then you burn it to hopefully return what you can to the soil, but usually you only get a few years out of that land. And at that point, you can't grow crops very well on it. And then you have to spread to another area. And so, this is, again, United States, we destroyed our native grasslands, hundreds of years ago, but we at least had the benefit of the land the soil was fertile and could sustain crops for a long time. Here in the rainforest, that's just not the case, unfortunately. Another aspect of habitat destruction, fragmentation. Fragmentation is where you break up a habitat into smaller chunks. And we do this all the time. A ski slope is kind of a vivid example where we sort of break up this habitat. Or if you kind of carve out a little field for a farm or for homes or something like that. The problem with this is actually, where is it? I guess I'll just tell you the problem with this. The problem with this, for example, large predators need many, 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 many square miles of undisturbed habitat in order to find sufficient prey to support themselves. And so if you, destroy just even these little chunks right here in the forest, if you're a mountain lion dependent on this territory to find food, there's not going to be as much food in this area anymore. And that makes it harder to survive. So it reduces carrying capacity. You can also limit migration. And for example, even something as simple as a bike path. Sometimes I'll see a dead frog or a dead insect on a bike path. And to those small animals, that bike path is a pretty big barrier to moving from one area to another. You'll see turtles crossing roads sometimes. And again, that's broken up their habitat. They're trying to find a place to lay eggs, and that road is in that path. Some places have started making green bridges, which creates a little corridor for large animals to move across, which I think is pretty sweet. And this is a joke that you can just, yeah. Okay. All right. So our final threat to biodiversity is pollution. And this is one that I wanted to spend a fair amount of time talking about. We've talked about some examples of this already. For example, we talked about applying fertilizer and how that causes eutrophication. And hopefully you remember that we add nitrogen and phosphate to our fields, and then that runs off into streams. That allows algae to grow because this limiting nutrient is no longer limiting. And then as the algae grow and die, they decompose, which consumes oxygen and creates very oxygen poor water for the other fish. So we've talked about that. That's an example of pollution, and certainly fertilizing your lawns is creating part of the problem. This is why many of the waterways in Edina are so green and mucky in the summer. It's because Edina as a community tends to really like that nice, beautiful, lush green lawn, and that requires fertilizers, which end up in waterways. We've also talked about toxins in the environment. We talked about biomagnification and how those kind of accumulate as you work up the food chain. And then another one is adding just garbage to the ocean. I don't know if you've heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, but there is an area about twice the size of Texas that is just full of garbage floating around from just things that have fallen off ships or been carried there by the environment. And here's a little video clip that kind of highlights that. So that's kind of a sad thing. I'm going to pause there, and when we come back, we're going to look at a final aspect of pollution, which is altering the atmosphere, because that one is kind of the doozy. So stay tuned, my friends, stay tuned.